Um, I want to thank everybody for coming out today. AJ, are you ready?
Yep, I'm ready.
And Jeff, you too?
Yep, ready.
Great. So I want to thank everybody for coming out today. This is, my name is Eric Peterson. I'm the president for the Aero Club of Northern California. And this is the third in a series of speakers that we have lined up to to replace our Crystal Eagle dinner, which we have elected not to do this year. Our speaker today is Jeff Holmola from NASA. And before we get to Jeff, I wanted to introduce AJ Barada, who is the treasurer for the Aero Club, the one who cashes all of your checks and make sure the bills are paid for the Aero Club. That's how we have some of the fun events that we do. And AJ, I would like for you to go ahead and take it away.
Sounds good. Thanks, Eric. Hello, everybody. As Eric mentioned, my name is AJ Barade. I am the least favorite among the members as I collect your money, but probably the most favorite amongst the scholarship recipients as I get to give it away to them. Speaking of, like Eric said, we did unfortunately have to cancel our Crystal Eagle event due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but we haven't canceled our mission of awarding the students with scholarships. As you may have heard, our goal this year is similar to many years of awarding 3 students $2,000 each, so a $6,000 total is what we're looking for. I'll go ahead and post the link to the GoFundMe. Remember, this is a free event, and if you're feeling extra generous, any contribution can go a long way. All the proceeds do go directly to the students, and many of them are pursuing their dreams in flight training. So with that, now that my sales pitch is done, I'll hop on to Jeff. Jeff and I do work together, so I know him very well. Jeff Holmola is a research engineer at NASA Ames Research Center, specifically working in the Airspace Operations Lab. The AOL, as we call it, Airspace Operations Lab, has traditionally done many air traffic control related studies, bringing in retired air traffic controllers, and worked on improving flows into some of the nation's most congested airports. We help develop tools for the controllers and recommendations for the FAA. Jeff has served as the integration and testing lead for NASA's UAS traffic management, that is UTM project, as well as co-lead of the joint NASA FAA UTM concept and use cases working group. He currently is the technical lead for advanced air mobility that recently changed names from UTM to AAM. So that's Advanced Air Mobilities Project and the national campaign for the Airspace of Test Infrastructure team. Prior to joining NASA, Jeff was the 3rd generation in his family to serve in the United States Navy, where he spent over 8 years as an operations specialist. And following his naval service, Jeff went on to earn a bachelor's in cognitive science at UC Regents Scholar from UCLA and a master's in human factors from San Jose State University. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Jeff Holmola, and he'll go ahead and take it away with some slides and a video. Go ahead, Jeff.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Abe. And like you said, we go way back, do a lot of work together. It's been a pleasure and an honor. And so I think format-wise, I'll go through these slides and video, and then like Q&A session at the end. I think so. Yeah, go ahead with that format. Sure.
Go ahead, and if we have questions, post them in the chat. And then I think Eric will go ahead and ask you some at the very end once he kind of filters some. And yeah, so go ahead.
Okay. All right, great. Yeah, so like Abe mentioned, or AJ, I'm going to be talking about the UAS Traffic Management Project, or Unmanned Aircraft Systems Traffic Management Project. Been going on for 5 years now. It's kind of in a closeout year at a more logistics project level. And so I'll give an overview of that and then highlight some of the last kind of culminating tests that we did last year. It's been a really fun project to work on. Like AJ mentioned, we did a lot of air traffic control, air traffic management, kind of more traditional type of work before. And then this is kind of really a new approach and a new paradigm to air traffic management, starting with small UASs, drones. But now, kind of like you can see in this picture, there's potential applications, well beyond that. So we'll get into that as we go forward here. I
Hey
can
Jeff,
figure out the
just a heads up,
slides.
you have the video up in,
Oh, okay.
in the
Time to
slideshow.
do a new share then.
Yeah.
Okay, how's this?
Looks
Is
good.
that good? Okay. This is what you're supposed to have been looking at that entire time. So, okay, so we'll jump into it. So starting probably like in the early 2010s or so, there started to be some discussion at NASA and as with some other kind of industry and other agencies. We can kind of tell that there was a groundswell coming in demand and interest in the commercial applications of small UAS or drones. So a lot of companies coming up, especially in this area, Silicon Valley, you know, a lot of different types of use cases were springing forth, and we could see that you know, there's something needed to be in place that could start kind of accommodating these new types of operations as they were starting to be kind of discussed and proposed through kind of a variety of areas. And so even early on, the FAA had kind of small UAS forecasts for how many would be kind of operating in our airspace in a given time. So they had estimates. These change, you know, every year, but the takeaway there is that we could tell that, you know, in the years to come, that there would be, you know, millions out there potentially. And so we need a way to be able to control them and manage them, you know, appropriately. And so, you know, and the thing driving the demand or the interest in having commercial applications for small UAS is that, you know, a number of use cases are out there, like package delivery. We see a lot of that nowadays, kind of news coverage, agriculture, infrastructure inspections. And so these, you know, the 3Ds that come up as things that kind of UAS can really help with dirty, dull, and dangerous types of jobs. And now that the technology is coming online and drones are becoming a lot more stable and dependable, you know, it's almost like the potential and opportunities for the use of them are almost limitless. And so this is really what was driving that that demand. And so there were a lot of, you know, existing use cases for drones. So like public safety, fire departments have been using them for a little while now. The police, other agencies for, you know, assisting with disaster response. And so we've had existing users for small UAS. And, you know, going forward, those types of users want to make sure that they can continue to operate, have that access to the airspace and the flexibility that's needed to support their operations safely. And the new users want access to the airspace just as well, just like the other existing users. And so that's really what kind of put forth the idea for UTM as a way to kind of manage that that traffic in kind of a safe manner that was equitable for the other entrants, and also providing a way for regulators like the FAA and others to provide the structure that's needed within the airspace when it's needed, but also that flexibility to allow for, you know, these new types of operations from these different companies. And so that's really been one of the tenets of UTM is flexibility where possible and structure where necessary. So we want to kind of have that balance between the two sides. And so what is UTM? What is this system? So it's really an air traffic management ecosystem for small UAS. And we started in low altitude airspace, uncontrolled low altitude airspace. It's an area that the FAA early on said they're not going to necessarily be providing services to manage the small UAS, kind of like, you know, it was very clear early on that, you know, the traditional paradigm of an air traffic controller managing sectors, watching the scope and giving positive control instructions to you know, the drone operators was not going to map to this type of world, and especially for the types of densities that are expected and the vehicle characteristics of the drones. And so this is really what UTM is meant to sort of provide, that complementary approach to airspace and air traffic management through this ecosystem of an architecture, which we'll get into in a little bit. And so really, the approach that we took was to leverage industry's ability to develop, use their innovation, their drive to be able to supply services in as part of this kind of UTM approach to traffic management, of course, it's all under, at the end of the day, the FAA's regulatory and operational authority, given where these services don't currently exist. And so through this development for UTM, the idea is to really enable a scalable approach to air traffic management at low altitudes for small UAS. That's where we're starting from. But like I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, there's broader applications to where we got to today. And really the key to this approach has been able to enable kind of longer beyond visual line of sight types of operations. And so, early on, a lot of operations are kind of limited to just visual line of sight of the drone controller to where the vehicle is. But the benefits and rewards for using drones for these different types of use cases and applications really come into play when you can operate beyond line of sight, longer distances for these types of deliveries and kind of search and rescue types of operations. And so really being able to enable that kind of safe beyond visual line of sight types of operations through this UTM system was a key goal and enabler through this the research. And also really looking at being able to define the roles and responsibilities for all the players, the FAA, operators and other stakeholders within this environment and ecosystem was another kind of key aspect that we wanted to explore through this project over the years that we've been working. And then through that, the thing that's really going to enable this ecosystem is an information architecture and data exchange protocols that really facilitate that exchange of information between all the stakeholders to provide that situation awareness that's needed to be able to safely kind of manage this airspace. And most of it is really software based, and so there's quite a technological component and integration aspect to it, which we kind of explored through our development and testing kind of throughout the life of this project. And in the end, be able to recommend kind of performance requirements for operators in this airspace. And so we weren't prescriptive per se on specific technologies that each operator needed to kind of adhere to or build towards, but we provided the kind of performance requirements, what you would need to be able to operate in this type of UTM airspace, where this architecture is doing a lot of that management and information management and exchange that's needed for the situation awareness of these operators. And so as we formulated the project, we kind of looked at different ways of kind of capturing the different types of environments that we wanted to look at as we conducted the research and our testing. And so we came up with what we call technical capability levels that kind of laid out a progression over really different types of environments based on risk and I guess reward in some sense, but really looking at starting at a very low density, low risk type of environment and then slowly building up off of that and adding in complexity, and those types of environments have greater risk that need to be managed. And it's looking at how this UTM system can help manage and address those risks and those complexities as well. And so these technical capability levels we call TCLs. We started with TCL1 back in 2015, looking at basically an environment that has very remote rural types of population, agricultural applications, and looking at kind of visual line of sight types of operations. It's very kind of more simple and tractable, and that was kind of in line with the overall philosophy that we took of kind of crawl, walk, run approach to our development and testing. So starting simple, building, testing, observing, assessing, and then kind of building up off of that. And so in TCL1, so each of these TCLs you see laid out here, they included at least one, if not multiple live flight demonstrations where we partnered very close with industry partners that were developing either vehicles themselves or these software components that go into making up this UTM architecture and infrastructure. And so for TCL1, we went out to Crow's Landing, which is about an hour and a half, 2 hours east of the Bay Area. It's kind of a jointly owned NASA facility, like a runway, I think out in the middle of farmland there. And had a number of different companies come out and run through flight tests. And this was kind of like the first look at having these drones operating connected to services that were kind of managing those operations from sort of a information exchange approach, giving that kind of situation awareness, being able to track these drones as they're making their flights, observing their plans that were submitted. And you had kind of a whole host of people that were deployed out there with the industry partners and kind of observing those first initial flights with the industry partners. So that was a very successful kind of first foray into being able to test what the system might look like. And that fed into TCL2, where we kind of upped the density a little bit, the traffic density for the drones. We added a little bit more complexity there. And now the idea as part of that concept was to start looking at not only agricultural types of operations, but those that might be done a little bit closer to towards kind of a suburban types of environments, which we covered in TCL3, but kind of straddling that progression. Starting to look at beyond visual line of sight operations. And so that's kind of, like I mentioned before, one of the key enablers is being able to kind of facilitate and manage those types of operations. And so in TCL2, we actually had, I think, at least 2 live flight demonstrations. The first one for that, we all went to Reno Stead Airport in Nevada, which is up in the high desert, right near the airport there. Had a number of industry partners come out for about a month of testing and doing beyond visual line of sight operations. We had a number of scenarios that we kind of walked through, these different use cases and events that we had kind of scripted in there, and the partners were able to connect to the UTM system, fly these different operations according to the scenarios, which tested out a number of different kind of concept elements that tied to TCL.
Eric, did you lose the screen as well?
Yeah, he just froze.
Okay, maybe he has to reconnect. Give me a second.
Okay. Well, folks, sorry about that. I mean, we are on the cutting edge of this technology, I suppose, and it is bound to happen. And while we are working to get Jeff back up, let me try something here. I have a little poll I put together. And if you take a look at this, poll says, how comfortable are you with the idea of beyond line of sight operation of unmanned aerial systems? And take a moment there, and you can click one of the 4 options there. And when you all are done, I'll share the results. We'll see how people feel about this. Right now, we got about 5 out of 19 have answered. It's going up pretty quickly. I can see AJ on the phone trying to get him back on. And if you have a recommendation, if there's another question you'd like to have answered or to put out like this, please send it to me in the chat. I would be happy to do this one more time. Let's see, we're at 15 of 19. Up to 17, give it another couple of seconds. I'm gonna guess AJ's not doing it. And all right, we'll call it there. I'm gonna end the poll and then share the results. And it looks like most of you are okay with the idea. Let's see, what do we got? 3 people who said, I love the idea. 8 of us said it's an okay idea. 4, half of that number, were a little uneasy. And 2 thought it was crazy. Nobody should be able to do that. It's kind of fun, interesting to see people's perspective. Great idea. So one, I wasn't around for the 4th of July this year, and one of my buddies took his drone up, and in my neighborhood, which is over by Allen Rock Park, and the video that he showed me made it look like the biggest 4th of July festival you've ever seen, with all the crazy people shooting off their huge fireworks, and apparently went for hours and hours. Oh, and there we are.
Okay, he's back. He's muted,
Here,
so I'll go ahead
unmute. There, I've unmuted him.
and let's hand it back over to him.
All right, Jeff.
All right. Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Yeah, sorry about that. You know, these things happen.
Oh, they sure do.
Okay, can you see the screen okay?
Yes.
I'll try and go back in full screen here. Okay, so I think I was wrapping up TCL2, and so we did that one flight test out at Reno Stead, and then we did kind of what we call the national campaign, where we used there are 6 FAA UAS test sites across the country that can support kind of UAS type of testing. And so we leveraged them to do what we called this kind of first national campaign, where we had each of the test sites kind of partner with some industry partners and basically be able to run through a number of flights while connected to the UTM system kind of across the country at these different test sites to really show the kind of the ability for UTM to be used and facilitate operations really across the country. So these test sites range from, they go from Virginia to New York, Nevada, Texas, Alaska, and North Dakota. And so we had operations simultaneously being conducted across all 6 test sites at the same time. We're monitoring from our lab. It was mentioned the Airspace Operations Laboratory at NASA Ames. We basically had a hook into all of that data that was streaming into the lab, and we were able to monitor all of those operations taking place. I think you can probably find some news clips and videos online that kind of show how that national campaign was conducted. It was really exciting to kind of see all those different pieces come together for that first national campaign. And of course, that led into TCL3, which we did in 2018. And this is where we started to look at applications for small UAS that were now kind of over moderate population areas, starting to increase the traffic density for the UAS interacting together, suburban types of applications. So now we were looking at the package deliveries that I kind of mentioned before, different types of kind of search and rescue types of operations, looking at the structure being placed into the airspace for kind of restricted areas, being able to communicate that out to the broader UTM system and communicate it to operators. Start to look at vehicle-to-vehicle communication. So it was stated early on that ADS-B is not really going to be a thing for all the small UAS that are going to be flying around. It would, saturate the spectrum. So starting to look at alternatives to that, and really also kind of looking at public safety types of operations. And so, they're one of the existing current users of UAS in the airspace, and we wanted to really focus and look at how we can integrate their operations, communicate their priority needs of those types of operations to the other kind of commercial users. And so how does that information get exchanged, and others really account for the priority aspects of other operators in the airspace. So we did that in 2018. And again, for that one, we used all 6 test sites. So that was conducted over the space of 2 months. We didn't do them all concurrently. We gave them a 2-month window and basically supported those operations. And so what we would do is send out a lot of people from our project, kind of human factors people, to kind of observe the flight crews, be able to kind of interview them as far as like how does a human fit into this kind of more highly automated environment. And also, again, kind of monitoring from the lab lot of displays, screens, visualizations, being able to look at the data streaming in. And it sometimes made for some pretty long days if we're starting in Virginia in the morning and then ending in Alaska at night. So we had to cycle through different shifts, making sure that nobody got overly tired supporting it. And then really the culminating test was completed last summer. Seems like ages ago now, but last summer we did what was called TCL4. And that's where we really were looking at urban UTM in an urban environment. So like high density traffic, urban applications, dense beyond visual line of sight types of operations, and looking at large scale contingency management situations. So what happens when you have a high density environment, high tempo environment, and then all of a sudden everyone needs to get down quickly, or you have an event happen to one operation and others need to get communicated that priority situation and be able to react accordingly. So we developed a number of scenarios to really get at these concept elements for TCL4. And in this one, because it was a lot more complex, we, instead of doing the 6 test sites, we focused on 2 that provided us really this kind of urban environment that we wanted to operate in. So we focused on Reno, Nevada, and Corpus Christi, Texas. And I'll get into more details on how that testing looked. But this is really the breadth of the kind of flight test events that we did over the course of the project. And of course, a lot of other concept development went into it along the way. You can find a number of concept of operations that were published by the FAA. I think there's 2 official ones that are out there that you can probably find online. Maybe we can send a link at some point later to give you some good nighttime reading to catch up on all of what's in here. And of course, NASA had kind of published the initial concept of operations for this back in, I want to say 2016 sometime. Okay, so throughout all of that testing and that development that went on over the years, we had the need to really define what an architecture looks like that would be able to support UTM and the need for this kind of airspace, air traffic management approach that didn't have direct control from the FAA side, the controllers. And so this is really, it evolved over the years. In TCL1, it was a very simple, kind of centralized approach to the architecture. And as we got into, particularly, I think, between TCL 2 and 3 is where we really started changing the architecture and settled upon what we see in this slide here. And so you can kind of look at this architecture in a couple different ways. One is just kind of left-hand side versus the right-hand side. And so on the left-hand side, you have kind of the traditional national airspace system with the FAA and their infrastructure that is basically managing the airspace that we are most familiar with. Many data sources in there, out of controllers on scopes, air traffic management. And then on the right-hand side is really where the UTM system lies. And this is where, like I mentioned before, we're relying on industry to do a lot of the development and innovation on this side. And the key piece and the core element to that is kind of in the middle of that right-hand panel called the UAS service supplier. So this is a component that every operator would connect into and become kind of a subscriber to for its services. And this UAS service supplier we call USS just for shorthand. And it's USS is really the thing that enables you to check that your operation, as an operator, you would submit an operation for where you want to fly in the form of these kind of 4D volumes, 3D volumes that have an altitude and lateral dimensions as well as timing components to where you would want to fly. You submit that to a UAS service supplier, and this service supplier is what checks your flight plans basically against what else is out there. So are other operators actively in the area that you want to operate? If so, you would get messages back as an operator that your flight plan has basically been rejected because it's overlapping with another operation or some existing airspace structure. Maybe you're going to be flying in some area that overlaps with controlled airspace, and so you would get notification that flight plan is not acceptable, basically, and you would have to replan using that type of service. Of course, later on, we got into the idea of negotiating between different operators. If you overlap, maybe you can agree to overlap and just monitor that area while you're doing that flight. But really, the key enabler for that situation awareness that's needed for the operators is through this USS component. The other areas in there, like up in the upper part of the right-hand panel, the supplemental data service provider, and that really enables or gives the opportunity for a lot of other services that can kind of complement the key features of what USSs do that aren't necessarily required at all times, but you can have the idea of, like, if you go into a really urban environment, maybe you need to subscribe to a dedicated weather service or kind of spectrum monitoring service, or something that's really helping you with some type of sense and avoid type of features that you might need in certain environments. And so that also enables the kind of a marketplace for a number of different services that are available for operators to kind of complement their operations depending on what's needed in the environment that they're planning on operating in. And so the key thing that basically connects the two sides, the traditional NAS and the UTM ecosystem, is this in the middle, this flight information management system. And so that is the piece that allows information to flow from both sides. And so the FAA doesn't necessarily want to see all of these operations at all times, across the country, but they do need access when needed to kind of what's happening in certain areas. And so this flight information management system might allow them to kind of reach into a certain area, pull the information that's needed to get an assessment of what's happening in a given environment. It also provides the ability for the FAA to impose structure, like I mentioned before. If there's an airspace that needs to be cordoned off, basically like a TFR or something like that, this flight information system is what allows the FAA to push out those structural components or constraints out into the airspace that gets communicated to all the operators via this UAS service supplier. And likewise, the information that is all being conducted through UTM, all that information sharing can be visible on the FAA side as well through this flight information management system. Okay, so this is really what the architecture that we had settled on, and leading into TCO4 was really what we had used. And at this point, for the TCO4 objectives, we wanted to look at UTM in real kind of a true urban environment. And kind of like I was mentioning in the previous slide, the USSs are kind of a key component to the overall UTM architecture. And it's something that we had planned on developing ourselves first as NASA. So we developed the initial specifications for what a USS does and how it does it through the code and application programming interfaces. We published those, and then throughout the years, we partnered with a number of industry partners that developed their own UAS service suppliers according to our initial specifications. And by the time we got to TCO4, we could exclusively use all industry UAS service suppliers to support these UTM operations in the test. So I think we had maybe close to a dozen companies that were providing these USSs for TCL4, which really spoke to kind of the applicability and commercialization opportunities that UTM is providing. And so in addition to the USSs provided by industry, we are also looking at kind of onboard technologies that could be used on the vehicles themselves or through the kind of operator service stacks that could help with separation avoidance or collision avoidance, communications, and of course identification. That's kind of a big topic over the last couple of years, this remote ID. So starting to look at some of the initial aspects and capabilities for that type of capability, and also looking at safe landing. So I mentioned a little bit earlier the contingency management, looking at how can the UTM architecture and ecosystem enable the identification and handling of contingency situations where you can find and do safe landings in kind of complex type of situations. And we constructed a number of scenarios. There were kind of 5 scenarios that we developed kind of according to the concept development that had gone into UTM at that point. That really, we tried to look at what some types of real world events would look like, especially in these urban environments where you would have potential for UAS to UAS encounters. We wanted to look at manned and unmanned interactions in certain areas, obstacle avoidance for static and dynamic obstacles, and different other situations that really kind of forced these types of contingency situations to avoid either airspace structures or other priority operations that are needed to access the airspace. So that's really kind of the setting I mentioned for TCO4. We've really focused on 2 test sites, one in downtown Reno, Nevada, and the other down in Corpus Christi, Texas. Both gave us kind of unique, different types of environments to work off of. And again, kind of like operating in the high desert back in TCL2, it was just as beneficial to operate in these types of environments as well, to understand some of the communication impacts being near buildings and having kind of a dense, more high fidelity, complex operating environment. And so that kind of set the stage. And here's a few pictures. These were really the first glimpse into kind of the real world of what UTM may eventually look like. And so these are, they're small UAS are very hard to see in the real world. And so we have here during one of the scenarios, there's at least four of the drones that are up, kind of working through the different steps of the scenario that we had laid out. And in addition to these, we had a number of kind of simulated traffic that were injected into the UTM system to create that overall density and complexity that we wanted to look at. So this is really, we worked really closely with the city to enable the proper authorizations and the closing off of areas to make sure that it was a safe operating area. And so it was a very successful event held over at Reno. And similarly down in Corpus Christi, same urban environment. These are UAS that were flying with their crews beyond visual line of sight, kind of near the buildings. And Corpus Christi was nice. It was also on the coast right there, so you could see some of these scenarios kind of incorporated being close to the water and being able to work through some of those aspects. We had, I think one of the ground control stations was actually on the flight deck of the carrier that's right there in the bay. So it was kind of interesting to see it take off and land from the carrier as it worked its way through the scenario. And so I have a little video here that kind of walks through a lot of the different scenarios and really the key topic areas that we addressed in TCL4. I'm going to try and play it right here, and I hope let me make sure the audio is correct this time as well, since I joined. Okay, so let me try this new share. Okay, let me know if the audio is okay or not.
Here is data from the TCL4 demonstration in Corpus
Okay,
Christi,
great.
Texas, that was held in August 2019.
All right, and just real quick, this is narrated by the chief engineer of the project, really one of the key people of developing the architecture and everything that we see that really facilitated all this. And this video was made by folks in our lab, so it's really a replay of the data. It's actual data that we kind of had flowing through the systems at the time. So, here we go.
It highlights 2 of the 16 test events that put the UTM system through its paces. The testing took place in 2 urban locations in Corpus Christi: the downtown test range, where vehicles flew in the urban canyon environment, and the Science, Entertainment, and Art District. During these scenarios, several live and simulated flights were operating simultaneously. Each flight goes through multiple operation volume states. Blue represents proposed flights, magenta shows active when a vehicle is flying, and white are operations that are closed. At the same time, more flights were taking place in the downtown urban canyon location. The active flight volumes are shown here. Focusing on the live flights in the C district, here are the USS-generated flight volumes that are active. We see one vehicle coming in for a safe landing. Here the Taro 2 vehicle takes flight, climbs to 233 feet above ground level, and begins to traverse its rectangular flight path. Meanwhile, the Taro 1 vehicle is flying an overlapping rectangular flight path at 266 feet. Here we see the two vehicles flying in close proximity with 33 feet of vertical separation. Onboard detect and avoid sensors track the vehicle's encounter and confirm safe separation. A similar close encounter test event was also performed in the downtown area. The second test event shown is the loss of the command and control link between a vehicle and its ground control station. In this case, the vehicle is pre-programmed to fly a safe contingency route back to the launch site if the command and control link is lost. Here, the nominal rectangular flight path is shown. At this point, the link is lost. The new contingency flight plan is shown in purple. The USS managing this vehicle updates the operation plan and increases the flight's priority to high. It also notifies other USSs managing traffic in the area so that those USSs can assist other vehicles in avoiding the contingency flight path. Finally, the vehicle lands safely at the launch site.
Okay, so that was an overview of the testing that we did in Corpus Christi. It was somewhat similar in Reno, but it gave us a really good look at kind of what this what UTM looks like, particularly in an urban or high complexity type of environment. So let me go back to the slides. Okay, are we back to my slides?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So now, you know, TCO4, we completed that last year. A number of reports have come out, papers have come out. If you ever want to, in addition to those ConOps, there's also a NASA UTM website that has access to a whole host of documents that have been developed over the years and accessible to the public. So if you're ever interested, I'm sure there's something in there for everyone to be able to look at to get more information on UTM. And so that was, you know, TCO4 was kind of the last step of our kind of research process. And so that was part of the project formulation, but it of course doesn't mean that UTM ends there. The idea from the beginning was that we would work very closely hand in hand with the FAA and industry. And kind of at the end of this, we turn over a number of research transition products to the FAA and for them to kind of take forward as part of the implementation plan. So what we have here on this slide is really the impact of NASA UTM research. And so, you know, it kind of made its way from kind of our project and the research into actual kind of fielded systems. And so already the FAA has what's called LANCE, low altitude authorization and notification capability. That's really kind of like a USS, but it's really meant for notification from operators to airports for those people that want to fly a drone kind of within a certain distance. I think like 5 miles of an airport, they can use LANCE to request access. And it used to be a multi-day process, and now it's you know, if you meet the right requirements, it can be a very quick authorization granted. Also, you know, we did our testing, and now the FAA has been congressionally mandated to do kind of pick up the mantle and do their own testing as part of the UTM pilot program. There's also other pilot programs like this integrated pilot program that's running kind of UTM type tests throughout the country. And so really, you know, UTM didn't exist before NASA really started looking at it. And so we developed kind of a market space for airspace services. The FAA has been, like I said, we've been working really closely together through this research transition team. So they've really adopted the UTM architecture and continuing its development, and they continue in the implementation of UTM as it goes forward from research and testing that you know, we were chartered with, and into a more hardened system that they will be responsible for. And of course, stemming from that goes into rulemaking. So rulemaking and that's going to be needed for being able to enable all these commercial applications with drones, which is becoming more and more of a potential now with this, shelter-in-place type of life that we're living now. I think the stage is potentially set for greater use of, small UAS for types of package delivery and those types of operations and capabilities. So FAA has been using NASA research to inform its policy and rulemaking, and we're seeing that now as new rules and policies are being developed and coming out soon. And also, all the testing and research that we did is providing kind of guidance to industry for development of their safety cases, data exchange protocols, and industry standards. And so we kind of set up the reference for what all of this looks like. And now it's kind of interesting as we're sort of sunsetting the official project. Industry now has basically taken up the mantle for the development of standards that they're going to have to be held to in actually being able to build up these services that are going to be implemented and out in the real world, in the wild. And it's really kind of been taken up by industry at this point to kind of develop those standards. But it's really based on the work that we have done kind of throughout the life of this project. And it's also spurned kind of internationally as well. So Europe has their approach to UTM that has been based on kind of what we did here, has different names. It's called USpace, but they're already looking at the same application and implementation over there. We've been also working with other international partners like over in Japan doing some disaster response type of research as well based off of UTM. And so the concepts and architecture really making its way globally. And I think it really laid down the path for kind of a new approach to air traffic management that we started with here with small UAS, and it's going to continue on with looking at how it can apply to other areas of airspace and other concepts that are coming on board now. I think the next talk, maybe next week, is going to look at basically kind of this new type of concept for advanced air mobility with these kind of electric vertical takeoff and landing type of vehicles, air taxis, or large autonomous cargo, and looking at how this type of approach to air traffic management can apply there as well. So it's trying to look at higher altitude, maybe in or very close to controlled airspace as well. So, but it all really can trace its way back to kind of what we did in UTM. And I'm guessing we're out of time. That's it. That's the last slide.
Well, thank you, Jeff. That was very interesting. Now would be a good time if you all have questions to put them in the chat feature. And while you're doing that, I have another poll that I would like to share. Let me pull it up here. Now, in part of Jeff's presentation, he talked about potential use cases for UAS. And in the first question here, there are two questions. The first one is, which of these use cases do you think is most likely to affect you personally? You can choose however many you would like. And so by all means, please go ahead and do that. Is it being shared? Can you all see it? Yeah, okay. There we go. And I'll give it about 15 more seconds, and then we'll go to the second question. So got results coming in. We got 11 out of 20. There we got 13 out of 21 people. All right. Let's see, that's a minute right there. So let's see here. How do I go to the next question? Well, let's share the results there. So looks like package delivery is what how most of you think it will affect you, and then public safety would be the number 2, coming in with 56% of the votes. Precision agriculture, 1 out of 16 people thought, 1 out of 16 votes, I should say, thought that that was important. That's interesting. Now let's see if I can get to.
Maybe not too many farmers in the audience, I guess.
Yeah, clearly. Oh, so it looks like it asked.
It showed both when we scrolled down.
Both. Okay.
Yep.
So, but then if I go back here, as you can see, I'm new to this. And then, so which of the possible use cases do you think is most important? And it's interesting that most people, or the largest percentage of people, chose disaster response. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all for participating in that. Let's see, have we got any questions in here? One of them that I was kind of curious about, Jeff, is you talked about, was it the service providers,
Yeah.
USS, and what type of service providers, what kind of services do you see as being necessary in this environment?
Yeah, so I guess like the main services that USSs provide are really the core pieces that are needed for this type of environment. And so like I was mentioning before, the key piece is being able to check the environment around you for the operator. And I should have included the video actually that Abe had made that really walks through kind of an operator interaction with a USS where you can kind of see what that really looks like. And so that's really the key piece, is having this service supplier that's able to kind of keep you as an operator informed of the environment that you plan to fly in. So are you clear from other traffic? Are you clear from airspace classes or restrictions that are out there? And being able to get communications from other operators in the airspace and the FAA as well. And so that's really the key service that's needed and facilitated by USSs. And of course, so there's the core component of what a USS does, and since it is out at industry to do the development, they can kind of make it as fancy as they want to kind of support their use cases and needs. So that's kind of one of the unique and nice things that really was enabled here, where you can have a company that can basically be a full stack, where they develop their own service supplier, they have their own flight crews and ground control stations that are talking to it, all kind of all self-contained within the same company. And so they can make it as advanced as they need to kind of support their operations and inject all sorts of different analytics and artificial intelligence, these types of things to kind of support their use cases and operations.
So in that example you gave, where a company could develop their own, would they then be feeding information into and receiving information from the flight information management system also? So they'd have their own connection, their own channel there?
Yeah, and so that's maybe, if you kind of look in this slide here, you can see these USSs are stacks on top of each other. So you can have multiple USSs supporting their own operators, but they're all kind of operating in the same airspace. And so on the one hand, each of those USSs is basically talking to each other to make sure that everyone's aware of everyone else's operations in a given area. And they all share connections to that flight information management system. So if the FAA needs to send something out and pose this structure, for example, that all the USSs get that same information. And so the operators that are affected by that type of message all get that through that flight information management system through their USSs that they're subscribing to.
Wow, that's really cool. So I got a question here from Walt asking, how are aircraft protected that are not on a flight plan?
Yeah, so we have kind of different approaches. You saw in the video that those kind of magenta boxes that you saw on the screen that were kind of encompassing where each of those vehicles were flying. Those types of volumes, we can kind of look at those as sort of like their flight plans. So we're not necessarily submitting as operators like strings of waypoints for your exact plan or trajectory, but we're kind of as operators submitting areas that we're going to be flying in for a given time. And so when we looked at the urban environment, we were looking at really more efficient types of flight plans, or these volumes that we're going to be flying in, to make sure that the airspace was more equitable and efficient. So you don't have like one person that's trying to hog up the whole airspace. We're trying to be a community of operators and citizens. And so that's, kind of a more precise, I guess, type of flight plan that you would use. But there are other ones that you could have for kind of like area types of operations. And so if you're going to be doing like agriculture, for example, you could have a large area as your volume that gives you kind of the flexibility to fly however you need to within that area that's not prescribed by these very tight types of volumes and boundaries. And so there's options as an operator for kind of how much flexibility you need in the airspace if you're not following a specific flight plan. But that all has to be weighed against kind of what type of environment you're working in. So if it's going to have a lot of other operations in the area, then you may be a little bit more constrained in how much flexibility you have to kind of fly where you need to.
Okay. Well, now imagine that other airplane is a Cessna 172. How are you ensuring that separation, the 172 that's just kind of a rogue airplane? He's just a guy out there flying along the coastline looking at the beaches.
Yeah, so that's what we were starting to look at in TCL4, starting to explore kind of what are the different options that are available, capabilities in there. We didn't probably get as far as we would have liked to in those interactions, but things that were being explored were like ADS-B in, for example, on the UASs, so that they could kind of be aware of the Cessna that's out there. And also having that alerting come through the UTM system as well. So USSs are maybe pick up that aircraft, and that gets alerted to the operators to be able to, if they need to land or whatever they need to basically do to avoid that aircraft can be communicated through there. That's another example of like a supplemental data service provider. You can have surveillance as an example, like radars in a given area that are connected to your service supplier or your ground control station that alerts you to surveillance tracks for something like a Cessna that can give you proximity warnings, and you can kind of react accordingly to that. So there's options there.
So how about the use of ADS-B on the unmanned, on the UASs? Is there much use of that?
No, so that was one of the early messages, and I don't know, maybe it'll change over time. I can't really speak for the FAA, but early on, it was sort of assumed that ADS-B equipped on all these small UASs was just not a viable approach to them operating in the airspace. Especially in now I think all aircraft starting this year are required to have ADS-B equipage, and so adding that multiple times over on all these UASs was just not something that was really, I think, considered. And so that was one of the things in the previous TCL, at TCL3, we looked at some alternatives to ADS-B that allowed for kind of vehicle-to-vehicle communication. And that was one of the things we looked at, was called DSRC, which stands for Dedicated Short-Range Communication. And that's the protocol that these kind of autonomous cars that are out there driving around are using to talk to each other, to be aware of each other using that protocol. So we were looking at how we might be able to leverage that as an alternative to ADS-B. And so we did some of that testing out in Virginia, where we actually had one of the UASs equipped with that DSRC and a car that was, I think it was a Jeep, operating on the Smart Road test facility out in Virginia. And those two were basically talking to each other during that time. And so that's kind of one of the testing. So it's one of the things that'll probably be, coming on down the line as part of the FAA testing, but there's definitely alternatives out there. A lot of people thinking about kind of what can be done for ADS-B-like type of capabilities that aren't on the same, same frequencies.
Yeah. Okay. I have one other question here from, which is from Richard, and says, are there any protections for aircraft from rogue UAS operators near airports?
Any protections? Oh, that's another kind of area that has been developed and explored kind of over the course of UTM. There's geofencing that some of the vehicles have, just part of their kind of baked in capabilities, where you have like an area that's defined on your ground control station and you're not basically allowed to fly outside of it. So that's kind of one layer in there that can help protect against becoming rogue in the first place. And there's others that sort of operate on similar principles. Out at NASA Langley, they developed something called, I'm forgetting now, it's part of the Icarus system, but it's basically something like a geofencing system that prevents drones from flying into and out of certain areas. So there's that type of capabilities out there in development at the moment. And I think it's kind of an open research question as well, kind of outside of those types of limiting layers, to have that communication between airplanes, traditional manned aircraft, and the UASs. And so that's the thing we also say, that the UTM system is available for situation awareness even from manned pilots as well. So if you can have like a subscription, if you look on this architecture here, there's those small green boxes in the kind of the center of the screen. There's public safety and then public. And so this public interface to the UTM system can allow people like, pilots to have that situation awareness of the system as well. So they would have an awareness of where these drones are at any given time to help with their situation awareness as well.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I sincerely appreciate you coming on and giving us this wonderful presentation. I look forward to hearing the follow-up to this next week when we talk about the urban air mobility.
Great, yeah. Thanks for having me, Eric.
You bet. That concludes the evening. We're at 7:35. We're about 5 minutes after the 7:30. Didn't lose anybody, so I guess that was A-okay. Thank you all again. One last plug for our GoFundMe page. It's a link on the chat. If you wouldn't mind just clicking it, anything that you can give will help us ensure that we reach our goal of $6,000 in scholarships this year for aviation students. And with that, I thank you one more time, Jeff and AJ, for your work on this. And we'll see you all next week.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks, everyone. See you next week.
Bye-bye.
Jeff.
Yeah, thank you. See you around.